We are back again. Dr. Hughes is back in the house. So exciting. Jenny Hughes is a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in the treatment of trauma and PTSD. As a clinician, she practices EMDR, cognitive processing therapy, and prolonged exposure therapy. Jenny recently published a book, which I have and I love, and I've already sent to other people. Go get it. It is designed for clients to use on their own or with a therapist, called the PTSD Recovery Workbook, which can be found on Amazon. Through her clinical work, Jenny discovered that her true passion is to support other trauma therapists through the inevitable experience of vicarious trauma. While trauma work is incredibly rewarding, Jenny knew the therapists making space for this healing deserved to be cared for too. This inspired her to create the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective, a membership site that helps trauma therapists go from feeling drained and demoralized to energized and empowered. Members of Brave work with Jenny to become more aware of how to name VT, develop realistic ways to tame VT, and ultimately reframe VT by thriving in their professional and personal lives. You can learn more about Jenny and her work with trauma therapists at braveproviders.com/VT tracker, on Facebook group, the Brave Vicarious Trauma Community, and on Instagram and TikTok at Brave Providers. And those will all be in the show notes. Welcome back. Once again, Dr. Hughes. Hello.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be back. And I'm so glad that I've gotten to see you so frequently lately.
I am so here for it. It's one of the many luxuries of having a podcast is I'm like, do you have an hour that I can just sit and talk with you? Oh, I'd love that. Thank you. Yes. So we are back again. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to talk more about the helping providers, right? The trauma therapist. And it's funny because I know I've said it to you before. And I know you hear from other people like, I'm a therapist and I sit with people and I hold space for people. And I don't know how you do what you do.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and so I think it's really exciting that you are creating this space for the people who hold to also be held.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and with that, I do want to acknowledge that there are certainly people who, like myself, identify as a trauma therapist because that's pretty much all I do. But
right.
We as therapists are all doing and holding stress and trauma.
Of course. Yeah. There are no trauma Olympics here on this show. That's right.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Oh, I love that phrase. I forgot you had said that before. I love that so much.
Yeah. I hear of traumas daily.
Yeah.
I do not specialize in trauma. And I think, again, there are no trauma Olympics here, right? I can be traumatized. You cannot be traumatized, everywhere in between. But I think for me, to be able to say that is what you hear so consistently. EMDR is such a beautiful technique, modality of work. I would love to be trained in that. I also that's really, really getting into the nitty gritty. And it's heavy.
Yeah, well, and I mean, even like you said, as someone who does strictly trauma work, I hear from so many other colleagues, I don't know how you can do that work, right? And in the beginning of my career, I was like, ooh, I'm such a badass. No one knows how I can do this. And that wears off pretty quickly because then you actually start to feel kind of alone, even, amongst your colleagues, because people are like, oh, I don't want to touch trauma work with, 100-foot pole.
Sure.
And then it's like, oh, well, I'm too much, not even my fellow therapists can handle me. Right.
Yeah.
Those are just the kind of the negative thoughts that can start to surface. And then that can kind of interact with the vicarious trauma that's happening anyway, which as this occupational hazard of any therapist or helping professional's job, but a feeling oh my God, who the fuck is going to help me? I do this work that no one else wants to do. How am I supposed to find a therapist that can work with me? Which, by the way, has been very difficult for myself. How am I supposed to find, any kind of community that is going to understand and not freak out when I'm sharing what it's like to do trauma work? And so that's why, for me, it's so important to get the message out about vicarious trauma and what it's like for people that are doing that work.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so important. That's so interesting for me to hear that you're having trouble finding somebody, because it's, we always talk about, I teach a class over at KU, and I'm always like, and when you talk to your therapist, and by when, I mean when, because we all need therapists now. And so I guess I'm a little flip about that for my students, but also it's getting somebody who is a good fit. And that's the thing too. I mean, this is a quick little tangent, but that is the thing when encouraging everybody who's listening, not just trauma therapists, is that just because you pick somebody and you meet them and they take your insurance or don't, or have a time that works, wherever, that they may not be your cup of tea. You might listen to my podcast and you might not like me as your therapist, right? Like
Right.
that's very possible. And I think, and I don't want to say like therapist shopping, but to make sure that you're looking around and finding the things that are going to speak to the needs that you have. And so for you, I mean, to be able to say, like, with that intense work, holding that trauma, wringing out your chamois, your ShamWow, like where do you go to wring out your sponge is very important. We talked about that last time. It's very important.
Yeah. I mean, and even like just for myself on the client side of it, I've worked with, really good therapists. But I also have felt with some of them that there was something that was not clicking, and I have to own my own part in that, in terms of the way that I've internalized these beliefs of like, oh, well, no one could possibly take care of me.
Yes.
That belief is way deeper than just being a trauma therapist. Let me just put that out there. And is then, like confirmed and compounded by the work that I do. But it really, I mean, it's tough. Those kinds of beliefs, they get in the way of our relationships, both personal and professional. And, for me, such a huge source of healing has been just through sharing those kinds of things with other people who are having those beliefs, to sort of start to like put cracks in all of that stuff, so that those cracks can then permeate in a positive way to break through those stuck points, and to be able to connect with people in all areas of my life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've actually, a couple of faces just popped to mind of clients. I'm obviously not going to breach HIPAA, but of clients who have either started to establish with me and then like again, trauma Olympics, my stuff's not that bad. Other people have it worse. I don't want to take up your time. And it's like, I mean, there's a meme that goes around amongst the therapists on like Instagram and stuff. It's like, you never know if you're going to talk about suicidal ideation or your mother-in-law's lasagna recipe. Like it just, and every week can be different. And then another one was like, a therapist must hope some days that we just sit and gab.
I saw that one recently. A colleague of mine sent it to me.
Yeah, lots of therapists have. I'm like, look, I have clients who show up and they show up every week, whether or not they have something that we're air quotes working on. They just want the time and the space and they want to talk. And then I have clients who are very solution focused and very driven of like, I feel like things are going well. Maybe we can skip next week. And that's always so great. But I have had people show up, like I said, either in the beginning where they're like, oh, I don't even know. And it's like, I know it's so hard to take that first step. And I'm just sitting there just like validation, like you deserve to take up space. Of course. Melissa Dumas came on an episode earlier, and that was the whole thing, was taking up space. And then I've also had people who've been working with me who will have something, some like Uvalde coming up or something big. And they're just like, I just don't feel like I can sit and bitch about my work stressors when 19 children were murdered. And I'm like, okay, all of that. You also still have this space. We can process that if you'd like to process that. And we can also talk about your work bitching. That's okay too. Right. Just taking up, and I think we're continuing to further advance the conversations in mental health, but people still feeling like, yes, everybody should have mental health except me. I'm good. I don't want to take up too much space.
Right. And like, as helping professionals, we are sometimes the worst at not asking for help, even when we know that we really need to, and I mean, like for me, that shows up in so many areas of my life. Like I don't know if I told you this story when we did our first episode together, but if I did, my apologies to you and
Say
your
it again.
audience. But it exemplifies how difficult it is for me to ask for help. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, we're like getting, towards the third trimester, doing all the, birth planning and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so we did like the Bradley method class. And through that, the teacher that we took our class through, we hired her as our doula. And I think doulas are amazing anyway. But my reason for hiring a doula was because I knew that, I didn't want my difficulties asking for help to get in the way of like my relationship with my husband, right? Like,
yes,
he's so amazing. But I was like, if I pay this person, then I can ask her for help and then she can tell my husband what to do versus me actually, God forbid, having to ask for help from my husband.
Which is just to clarify, because I know he's going to listen and we love him. He is spectacular. And
oh my God, he's such an amazing human being. He's like, so he's not scary to ask for help from. All he wants to do is help. And then he has to deal with me who's like, no, you're not allowed to help me. No one can help me.
Climb my wall, please.
Right, exactly. If I pay you to help me, then that's fine, right? So like that's the level for me at which it is very difficult to ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a beautiful representation of like, and thank goodness you have the ability to access that and the insight to be like, okay, this is my workaround for my.
And I straight up told both of them that too. Like our first meeting with the doula, I was like, I just want y'all to know that this is my actual scheming plan. Yeah. Because I can't ask for help. So I'm going to pay you to be this bridge for between me and my husband for when I need help. Like,
yes. Oh my gosh. But again, I love that. And I hate that for you that you can't just, because again, he's so lovely and amazing. Why you married him. But like, and then also to be able to say like, there are ways for us to work around certain things in the world of saying whatever your shtick might be to be able to say, what else can we do? And that can be part of the conversations that you're having. Like, well, I don't feel comfortable with X, but I need to get there. So how can I circumvent and still get there? I love that. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, like recognizing for me, so sorry, I'm talking about school so much, but I had my first class this week and as absolutely crass as it sounds to talk about a class teaching suicidal ideation and self-interest behavior, I had so much fun in those 3 hours. I had such a great group. They were very open and questioning and so curious. They're so hungry. They just want to know. And I'm like, let's talk more about that. Yeah. And so I asked them in the beginning, though, what's your favorite adaptive coping skill and your favorite maladaptive coping skill? And of course, tongue in cheek, what's your favorite maladaptive coping skill, right? And one of them actually raised their hand and they were like, because I asked them to get together in groups and introduce themselves and then do the whole group. But they're like, what do you mean by favorite? And I'm like, oh, that's just an introduction into my personality, is that I like to do things with a sense of humor, but it is so. And of course, mine is a bacon cheeseburger, specifically from Wendy's, a Baconator. They are not a sponsor of this podcast, but they can if they want. Somebody at Wendy's, give me a call. And I recognize that my binge eating disorder is really my light starts going off when I'm like, I have a fridge and freezer full of food and I'm going to McDonald's and I'm going to get a double cheeseburger. And I'm like, but I have a fridge full of food, or ordering Hawaiian Brothers or whatever it might be. I could sit here and talk about all of it's all fast food, but, and having, I'm recognizing when I start to ramp up. Right. And if I may self-disclose, that's been my week this week. My husband was gone all week and I was feeling the stressors and school was starting and all of that. And being able to recognize, like, what are your kind of red flags? What are the things that are showing you like, hey, maybe time to pop into a session, maybe time to chat with somebody. And that's mine. And so that's why I think is very helpful with some of these tools, like the trackers that we talk about, is to say, obviously the VT tracker, a mood tracker of saying like, what are the patterns? What are the things that are coming through? What can I see that maybe in the past I can see this is not an adaptive coping skill? I mean, because it's not about not having the feelings. It's about having a better relationship with the feelings and emotions.
Right. Exactly. And that's why in the Brave Collective, we do name it, tame it, reframe it, right? So
Absolutely,
name
yes.
VT so that we can tame it and then reframe it and transform. And
Mhm.
actually, I was just talking to someone who is working through the tracker, and we were talking about some of the things that she was learning about
Mhm.
herself. And one of the things that she shared was like, and she's similarly like doesn't do all trauma work, right? She's not a quote unquote trauma
Right.
therapist. And she works with like immigrants and like dealing
Mm.
with like citizenship stuff. Like she
Mm.
works with very like
Yes.
really high stressed folks and with lots
Mhm.
of trauma. And so that's why she wanted to do the tracker, and she had reached out to me to talk about it. And so anyway, she was like, yeah, like I'd always heard about vicarious trauma and we'd learned about it. But
Yeah.
then even going through this, I was really surprised at like doing the checklist and thinking about
Mhm.
like, okay, within like emotional, physical, relational, occupational, like, oh, these things are vicarious trauma.
Mm.
Wow, like that was really eye-opening. And then tracking it was really surprising for her as well, seeing kind of how it was all showing up for her. And
Mhm.
then we also talked about how, like, a lot of the things that are considered part of vicarious trauma, they can also be part of, generalized anxiety or
Yes.
depression, or
Mhm.
like life is just stressful and it fucking sucks right now.
Yes.
And so it's not about like pathologizing that, but of getting some clarity around, okay, so is my
Mhm.
irritability because I'm soaking up too much trauma in my work? Or is it because I'm stretched too thin in multiple areas, / it could be all of those things too. So
Yes.
having the ability to name it is just, it's really validating. It's really eye-opening. And then it opens the doors to pathways that you didn't know were there, pathways towards healing in a lot of different areas.
Yes, amazing. That what you just said made me think of, and sorry, I'm like meme city today, but the meme of like somebody with a big jumble of yarn in their thought bubble, and then there's talking to a person across them who is the therapist, and the therapist is like untangling it and rolling it into individual skeins. And I actually used that metaphor in a session this week. Again, no more details because HIPAA, but just from my perspective of how it can be very, like, it doesn't have to be discrete. It does not have to be like, this is that, and this is that, and that's how I'm going to work on it. And right. So I don't want everybody to feel like, wow, there's no way I can untangle all this. I might as well not even try.
Right.
Right. Again, nothing, very few things are all or nothing. Everything often is on a spectrum. So I do think it can be very helpful to be able to say, like, for example, is your anxiety as a result of feeling anxious? Is your anxiety a symptom of your depression? Like, how can we help you to untangle the blue thread from the orange thread,
Mm-hmm.
from the red thread, and put them into their own skeins as best we can, knowing that they're never going to be fully the way that they were when you got them from Joanne Fabric.
Right.
All right. Can you tell that I like to sew and
Yeah.
crochet? But I love that metaphor of like,
Yeah.
recognize, and I like what you said too. It's not about pathologizing. It's not about the diagnosis. Yes, to bill insurance, unfortunately, we do have to, for the good faith estimate, we do have to give a diagnosis. And I'm very clear of, I'm going to give that to you if you feel, because I have to give a good faith estimate now as of 2022.
Right.
I have to give that to you. You are going to see it. So if it's empowering to you, if it's impactful, if you find that, I have my beautiful purple DSM right here. If you'd like to go through that, we can. And also that's not necessarily right. Like, it's not necessary. It's not you have this, right. So I'm glad that you mentioned that too, of understanding that it's not about necessarily pathologizing, but just, again, the insight and the understanding.
And vicarious trauma in and of itself is not a,
Absolutely.
disorder like
That's
we've
right.
talked about. And
Yes, that's right.
so it can certainly lead to,
Uh-huh.
like depression, anxiety. People
Mhm.
can certainly experience a trauma or stressor related disorder as a result of their work.
Uh-huh.
But VT in and of itself is not a pathology.
Right. Absolutely correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's this most recent week's episode where we were talking about what mental illness is not. And I think it's very important that we're articulating that we're understanding, that we're speaking intelligibly about the things that we're talking about. I love that we're talking about mental health and that we're opening up the space, and I'm just going to keep bringing up memes. The memes are all about like, well, I was talking to my therapist and
Right.
and that's great because it's normalization. And then also making sure that we're speaking appropriately about what we're talking about.
The conversation that you had in your last podcast, her name's Kate, is that right?
Yes, Kate Acton.
Yeah.
Everyone go listen.
Yeah. That was so powerful, of talking about what is the difference between mental health and mental illness, right? And that it's important to understand that those are two different concepts. And when we're talking about supporting our mental health, for me and in the vicarious trauma space, it's about acknowledging things like vicarious resilience, right? Because even as we're doing really tough trauma work, we also, that can actually fill up our cup in a lot of ways, because it's so inspiring and encouraging to see our clients overcome so many things in their lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And kind of going back to like not being willing to ask for help, I think a lot of people are not willing to accept compliments, certainly, which I admit to my clients, I'm a little bit too much of a cheerleader sometimes. I'm like, I'm going to embarrass you just for a moment and be a little bit of a cheerleader, then I'm going to pull back because that is not helpful. But even in recognizing the work, I always bring it back. Like I've had so many clients, this is going to sound a little backdoor brag, but like so many clients are like, I just feel so much better. I just feel like and whatever. I'm like, yes, because you've been doing a lot of really hard work. And I'm like, that's because you've been doing hard work. Or I've actually had clients who had no awareness at all that it was, they would have been like, I just don't really have it. I really felt like I handled that so much better. I don't really know why. And I'm like, because you've been in therapy for 3 months.
Right.
Like,
what is that like for you as their therapist, to see them just take leaps and bounds and to see the change that can happen?
Beautiful. It is gorgeous. It is chills when I am able to have somebody start, whether it's from a place of insight or not, because I again have a client popping right to mind, and she was saying that she was able to do these things, and I literally said, because you've been in therapy for 3 months and you are doing this work, that you are able to set a boundary. Or I'll have somebody say straight up, like, because I've been having these conversations with you, because I've been really focusing on that I've been successful in something. And it fills your cup. I mean, it's one of those things where we've talked about and if I can be really candid, I've had people joke about like, we should make a TV show where we talk about like what therapists, and I'm like, first of all, like HIPAA, second of all, you'd have to make it funny. And then I think people wouldn't enjoy thinking that their therapists are making fun of it. That's not the tea, but yeah. So being able to see that growth and transformation, it's not about me, but it does help us to get to a space where you don't feel like you're banging your head against the wall, and you do know and recognize and own that change is possible, that change can happen if people want to make the change. And it is unfortunately not a checklist that I can give you and come back in a week and everything's, but I would love that, man. If I could create that checklist, I would happily.
Well, and it then has such a transformative effect on your work as a therapist, right?
It does. Yeah, because we're humans. We're all, I mean, I think people think that you go and you get your PhD in psychology and you get your master's in social work and counseling and whatever, licensed marriage and family therapist, all of these letters that we have behind our name somehow make us impervious to stress, and that we're just constantly mentally healthy, and that we're just constantly on top of our game. And like I said, just this week, my binge eating disorder has come flaring up, and I do have, because I am a therapist and because I do my own work, I have the insight to be able to do that. But it doesn't mean that I haven't gone to Chick-fil-A and Wendy's and McDonald's multiple times this week, Friday. So,
well,
yeah.
and I think a lot of times as therapists and helping professionals, because, we talk the talk, if we're not walking the walk, we can get caught in our own shame spiral. And
that was literally where I was going next.
Yeah. And especially, if we're keeping those things secret.
Absolutely.
So like for me, like knowing that I am really poor at asking for help, it's important for me to voice that so that it doesn't have this power over me through keeping it secret. Right.
Yeah.
Knowing that, there are definitely things that I do to check out. And I'm working on that stuff right now.
Yeah.
Because I am realizing how much it was getting in the way of the things in my personal life primarily, but also my professional life that fill up my cup.
Yes. Absolutely.
And by, making it known that I am dealing with those things, it helps to stop that shame spiral. It's really scary to say that stuff, but it's super important. And I think that a really powerful place to start that sharing is with our other colleagues, right? Just like in the Brave Collective or anywhere that you have colleagues that you can share this with, who are going to understand what it's like to be a therapist or helping professional and be a human.
Absolutely. Because I mean, we don't work in a vacuum. You and I are part of also a monthly mentor peer supervision group. Because it selfishly, being in private practice is beautiful. I love it so much. It's why I went to school. It's what I wanted to do. And also, there's no water cooler talk.
Right.
And not that we water cooler talk about patients at the water cooler, but there's no chattiness there.
Right.
We missed that. And then also that interdisciplinary collaboration, which, well, we're all mental health, but you know what I'm saying? Like that is one thing that I really missed, was the treatment team aspect of things. I loved having the forced opportunity to sit in a room with the nurse who sees the patient for 12 hours a day, the psychiatrist who is having different conversations sometimes than the patient is having with me in group therapy, and even the mental health technician, we call them patient care advocates, PCAs, who are on the floor with them all day, that sort of thing. And so that's what's really nice about having that space, is to come in. And then of course too, I don't know everything.
Right,
I do not know everything. And sometimes we do have challenging cases. And so we're in this HIPAA compliant space where we can say like, y'all, I'm hitting a wall. I don't know where to go next. Or this case is really taking it out of me, and I'm struggling to find ways to kind of safeguard my own peace. What are your suggestions? And not being alone and not feeling like I have to be she woman and have all of the answers is powerful.
Right. Exactly. And there are so many folks that, whether they are, working in private practice or working solo or even working in a group or agency setting, feel really alone and need to figure out how to create those spaces for themselves. I have one of the times that VT got the worst for me was working within a traumatized system of care, where the agency itself was so stressed, and we were all trauma providers, like all we did was trauma work, and yet the system was traumatized. And it was so demoralizing. And it was just like my feet were just like, to think of a metaphor, it's just like my feet were like so heavy I couldn't even move, right? I was just stuck in this VT and I felt so helpless. And there's this memory that I have, and it was kind of the moment where I decided that I needed to, figure out how to make a change, of just crying in my colleague's office. And I have cried in plenty of colleagues' office, right? That is not the rock bottom.
Oh yeah. I have many colleagues who are probably listening like, yeah, that Meg's cried in my office. Yes, continue. Go for it.
But it was the fact that I didn't feel like there was any way out. That is how deep I had gotten into this rut of VT, because even though I was surrounded by other trauma therapists and professionals and some of the some of the best ones in our region, we were all so isolated
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
just so disconnected, and we were so feeling so much VT ourselves.
Mhm.
And so that's, you know, another reason why I've worked to create the Brave Collective, because
Mhm.
I know that there are so many people out there who are around other professionals every day, and yet they feel completely alone.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so tell me more about kind of what you envision for, I know it's new, but my goodness, there's so much momentum already, and I love to see it. You love to see it. It's just, again, beautiful. It is a beautiful thing to behold when people are like, "Oh, this space exists. Let me jump right on in. Let me kick my shoes off. Let me prop my feet up. Let me tell you a story." And so I just was curious kind of what you had envisioned and kind of where you think you see it kind of going.
Yeah, so we're still in kind of the building phases.
Mhm.
Well, it's more in some of like the tweaking and finalizing phases, I think, actually, of the collective. But
Yeah.
so the collective is going to be an online space, an online
Mhm.
community and membership site, where trauma therapists, which again, that definition is very broad. It's
Yes.
anyone who is saying, I do trauma work and I want to connect with other people
Mhm.
that are doing that, are able to come together. And really, like, the core of the work that we do in the Brave Collective is through our relationships and the community that we build, in terms of allowing each other to be seen and heard, right?
Mhm.
Of doing that healing together, because we are not going to say, oh my God, I don't know how you can do that work.
Right. Right.
And because we're all doing that work.
Right.
And I'm not saying that to be kind of flippant to people who have said that to me. It
I have
just
said
makes
that
me
to
feel
you.
very
You're on my show. So this is I took no shade from that. I know exactly what you,
okay.
but again, because I genuinely, yeah.
Right. You truly don't. And
Yeah.
that is awesome. Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, I want this to be a space where we don't have to worry about hearing that, because I think sometimes it feels like then, like, I have to hold that for the other person who's saying, like, I
Yes.
don't know how you can do this work. And I'm like, okay, cool.
Yes.
Let me hold that for you.
But that's true, and I do, if I may, so people are probably like, "Geez, Meg, you're a terrible friend," but like, I think that I have also articulated that I have the space for you in the capacity. Obviously, we do participate in that, and
Right.
so it's not that, but I do think that there is kind of it can be, you can have people who are like, "I don't know how you do that, and I'd like for you to understand that I'm also the implicit undertone of that is, and please don't tell me."
Right.
And
Right.
so then that's an immediate isolation point of, okay, so that's off limits for you. Let me put that in my Rolodex in my brain of, okay, so I can't talk to Sally Joe over there about what
Right.
um, and there are people who can say that, and but even so, like mine's more of like an adoration and anyway, but yes,
Well,
so
and
I
it's
think that's
important
really,
that we're having these difficult conversations like you and I are doing right now, of like,
yes.
okay, so what are kind of the boundaries within our relationships? Because if
Mm-hmm.
Sally Joe over here can't talk about it, then that's
Right.
fine.
Right.
But helping to figure out how we can communicate this amongst ourselves, as especially as professionals, I think within like the therapy world,
Right.
of how can we communicate these boundaries in ways that don't feel isolating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you and I are doing right now by having a difficult conversation
Yeah.
about, like, oh wow, this is actually how that made me feel.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's so helpful because sometimes, and this, it goes back to everything. Sometimes we say things and we think that it's a compliment and we think that it's helpful or funny or all of the above. And then it's like somebody walked away with that in a totally different taste, with a totally different
Mhm.
taste in their mouth. And it's important to know and important to be able to share. But then again, if you don't feel like you can ask for help, how certainly do you feel like you can set a boundary with a friend who was just joshing around? But
And also
yeah,
not wanting to people to feel like they have to be silenced, or that they have to be so careful about what they're
right,
saying, right?
right.
Like, I think that our language is so powerful and important, but I
Mhm.
also want people to be able to share the words that are on their mind and on their heart, you
Yes.
know? And so
Mhm.
it's in that follow-up conversation where that growth and that healing happens, I
Yeah,
think.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I actually remember, I'm reflecting now. I think I made it through an entire episode with Kate and didn't mention Brene Brown once. So I'm going to do it now. But But that's why Brene Brown wrote Atlas of the Heart and defined 83 emotions, because when we ask people to name emotions, what is it? They're happy, sad, and pissed off. Are the three emotions. And we know, like, we can conceptualize easily that there are more than three emotions. And also, if I, what is it, Billy Eisner, who runs around like Billy on the street and it's like shoves a microphone in someone's face, and like if I stopped you randomly on the street and shoved a microphone in your face and asked you for emotions, that's kind of where your brain goes. And so when we can use the appropriate language, we can express ourselves more fully, and we can get to a place where we understand each other better. So I can say something that I think is a compliment, and you can receive it as a compliment and also have a feeling about it, and then let me know that. And then I can continue to say that I think the work you do is brilliant, you're a genius, and also be able to tailor that and temper that conversation in a way where I'm using more language that's more appropriate and build you up and validating. Yeah.
Well, also being able to express, like, I don't know how you do that work and I have no interest in doing it.
Well,
that's totally fine.
If somebody wants to pay for me to take some EMDR lessons, but I'm going to talk about, my girlfriend and I talk every day, and she teaches music lessons. And I think Ariane, I fully just like embodied Ariane. Sorry. If somebody wants to pay for me to take some EMDR courses and get licensed and certified in that, I would be delighted, because I think it is, I don't want to use the word magic because I feel like that is flippant, but I think it's magic. So
well, and
yeah, absolutely.
A point that like when, regardless of the kind of work that you're doing as a therapist, if you don't have the training that you need, then it's going to be super stressful. Like, I am not trained in eating disorders, and I refer that out. And same with like substance use stuff. Like, for different reasons, I've chosen not to be trained in substance use. And for eating disorders, I just have never like had the opportunity to.
Sure.
But
because we don't have all the time in the world. All of this costs money. I know we spoke about it. I'm so sorry I keep bringing up another episode when I'm in your episode, but we talked about it.
I'm glad you are. I was listening to it yesterday, actually, and so I wanted to talk about it anyway.
Also, thank you for listening to my podcast. But yeah, just the systems that are in place. It's not, I don't know how people envision what a therapist does or how we become where we are, but it's not like we can just sign up at the emdr.com place and be like, great, okay, I'm going to take these couple classes and get some more letters behind my name. And I'm not coming for again, I love EMDR, but it's everything that all of these specializations that you're working on cost money. They're very expensive. They take a lot of time. The training that I did last week, I gave up my husband's birthday, which also meant that he volunteered to watch our children by himself on his birthday. It was very expensive. It was lovely. And so it is one of those things. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, so I'll bring it back. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where as a therapist, we decide what we'd like to try to specialize in, where our focus is going to be, the techniques that we want to learn and bring in. And some of that is purely by choice. I'm a licensed chemical dependency counselor in Texas. I love to work with the substance use population. I don't do it virtually. So that's why I'm not specialized. My specialization is not in that, but I don't want to get specialized in DBT. I love emotion regulation and distress tolerance, but it's not something that I want to focus on. So it's kind of, it's yes, and it's access, and also not everything is for everyone.
Right, exactly. And even as we get skilled up in different areas, we then, as we're really like diving in and doing that work, we learn what the occupational hazards are in these different areas of specialty, right? And so in the Brave Collective, we don't do training on trauma work in there. That's not what this space is for. It is just for creating the community to support each other in our shared experience of vicarious trauma. And they're also, in the collective, there will be monthly Zoom calls with me where we're all able to jump on a call, or whoever's available. And there'll also be replays, of course, to talk about what we're discussing that month. Each month will either be in name it, tame it, or reframe it. And so we'll be really focusing in on one part of the framework, and that'll rotate through each month. And then, there'll be lots of different types of content that are shared in there to support the members in their journey, both given wherever we're at in that month for name it, tame it, or reframe it, and just to meet people where they're at in that given moment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, that'll be so, and that's so great. Again, having that connectivity, that like grounding space of like, okay, and now I'm going to go back into this beautiful space that I have. I'm coming back home to my little group. That will be so helpful for people. Yeah. I mean, it gets to be a lot. You name it, tame it, reframe it, you move forward and recognize have the insight to recognize the positive pieces too. Change can happen. People can make improvements. We're not banging our heads against the wall most of the time. And sometimes it can be easy to feel that way.
Well, and there is a cyclical nature to vicarious trauma. And that is one reason why we move through name it, tame it, reframe it every 3 months, because it's important to go back and reassess, rename what VT looks like for you right now. I actually just finished doing the tracker myself this week. And it was really interesting going and doing my own reflection again. It's something that is important for me to do regularly, and seeing how things have changed for me and what things are more difficult now compared to the last time I checked in on my VT. And so acknowledging that it is cyclical, it's not a linear process, I think is really important, so that we give ourselves and each other permission to be human.
What? Human? No. Didn't you get your Teflon coating when you went to
Exactly. Well, and that's something I actually I'm working, I'm writing some stuff about that right now, about just carrying our own stress and trauma into the room with our clients, and what that's like, and how that what it's like to both hold our own pain, and acknowledging that is real, while also, having to contain it and be the space holder for that person that you are serving.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely had big things happen right before sessions with clients that are stressors, and it's a skill that is practiced often to be able to compartmentalize and say like, okay, well, either I need to cancel this appointment, which I really don't like to do, rarely do I, or that is going to I'm going to take 45 minutes and I will deal with that. And I will deal with that in 46 minutes. Right. And being able to get to that space, because that is somebody else's time.
And I think there also is another piece of harnessing our own experiences, whether they're happening right here and now, or they're sometime in the past, and allowing that to really deepen the work that you're doing with your clients. I mean, my clients bring me to tears on a semi-regular basis, because I'm so impressed and amazed at the work they're doing, and because also, our strings are connected. And so, and I think that, not that I'm bawling in session, but they can see that I am affected by it. And that's really powerful. And there's times where I know that what they're sharing is bringing up some of my own shit. And it has deepened the experience that we've had together in their work. I'm not sharing this with them, but it really is like such a more intense experience of being seen and heard. And so I think that there's a lot of power and strength in that when we learn how to use it.
Oh, absolutely. It makes it so much easier for us to be curious and not judgmental when we are able to empathize. That's been a big, I've only had the class for 1 week, but that was a big thing. They all had to write critical reflections for me, and a couple have turned them in, and they're all talking about like they're master's level social work students. So they're not coming in being like, I'm looking forward to continuing to be judgmental of people who are suicidal, but they're open and honest about how judgmental they have been, they have more insight into why that is and the goal of being there. And so that's what I continue to say. I'm like, when you're asking these questions, they need to come from a place of curiosity and not judgment. How could you possibly want to do this? How could, right? We don't need to go into, unless y'all want to take my 868 course, but that's what it is. And I think it can be very helpful of continuing to help us to ask those questions and help people to get where they need to be. Yeah, I'm pretty rigid on like my self-disclosure. And I know that is very deeply amongst the therapist population, but I like the way that you described it, for sure.
It's more of a self-disclosure of feelings, or of just like this totally unspoken shared understanding.
Yeah. Just sharing it in that space. Absolutely.
Which, by the way, is totally doable and over telehealth and happens all the time. I mean, we are, however far into COVID, and, my private practice was set up all telehealth even before COVID. But I think that's still something that people wonder, is if that connection between the client and the therapist is still like real, or if it'll still really happen. Yes. And let me tell you, it does.
Oh my gosh. I'm so actually, can I be honest? That popped into my head quickly. And then I was like, well, that's okay. And I'm glad that you said that, though, because I actually thought the same thing, because I know that there are some people who are really rigid and digging their heels in that telehealth is not in a space. And actually you are very much aware, because I left you to move here. We were neighbors. And so that was my vision too, was I'm just going to do telehealth, because especially in Houston, it was always, I'm running late, there's traffic on the 610, there's a wreck, it's blah, blah, blah. So I had always envisioned doing that as well. And of course I moved here in March of 2020, so I didn't have a choice. But yeah, there really is, especially because we are all getting more and more comfortable with like staring at ourselves on the screen and being able, there is that ability to feel that spark, even though you're not sharing the same oxygen.
Yeah.
So for anybody who's considering virtual therapy but have some hesitation, Dr. Hughes and I both strongly encourage it. It can still be very powerful and meaningful. Well, I know we both have hard outs coming up, so I want to give you opportunity to remind everybody where they can find you. It will of course also be in show notes.
Yeah. So head over to braveproviders.com/VT tracker to grab that, snag the tracker. And then you'll also be able to get all my weekly musings on vicarious trauma, vicarious resilience, all that fun stuff.
I get so excited when I get an email from you. I'm like, oh, what's he talking about today?
And then also, so on TikTok and Instagram at Brave Providers. And if you want to jump in the Facebook group, it is open to any kind of helping professional, and you can just search for the Brave Vicarious Trauma Community on Facebook. Yes.
And that is helping, she said, that is not mental health specific, helping professionals, please. So teachers, paramedics, I'm not going to list y'all know who you are, but please come join. Well, Dr. Hughes. Oh, and also quickly. So I put Dr. Hughes. So you already know the story of how Dr. Hughes and I met, because that's how I make everyone tell that story. But so one of the very first night we hung out, at Los Tios in Houston, if anybody wants to go, it's delicious, puffy queso. And you told me the story about how somebody had paged you overhead at the hospital in Louisiana as Dr. Hughes. And so that's how you were on my phone until you got married. And so I put that in there because we had talked about it, and I guess somebody had either not listened to the first episode or they'd forgotten. And a couple people were like, Dr. Hughes. And I was like, yeah, Dr. Hughes, remember his story. So in case anybody was like, why? That again.
So the icing on the cake of that story is that after they paged me, I was walking downstairs and I opened the door of the stairwell, and the chief medical officer of the entire hospital was there, and we knew each other really well. And he was like, Dr. Hughes, and he gave me a big high five. And so then he always called me Dr. Hughes after that.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's the best nickname.
I know. Yeah, it's so good. It's amazing. Because usually people say Hughes, which no, that's really annoying.
I mean, my maiden name I thought was, it was very difficult for a lot of people, but Duke I was excited about, and I still have some people who are confused by it, which was a bummer, but it's still easier than my maiden name. So yeah. Well, thank you for your intellectual and emotional labor. Thank you for building this community. We need it. that it's not talked about enough. It's not available enough. And I'm really happy. And it's great to have someone so brilliant to be kind of the leader of the charge in
Yeah.
this regard. Yeah. So
Thank you
for
so
everybody
much.
else,
The card
everybody
will be
go.
opening for the collective in the fall. So
Perfect, perfect, perfect. All right. Well, we look forward to that. I'm sure I will make you come on again before then, or right around then for the launch. We'll talk about some more or something completely different and also mention it. So
right.
absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Everyone else, thank you for listening. I have to do, Jenny, I'm so sorry. I say it at the end, but somebody encouraged me to say it here. Make sure that you go and subscribe. Give me my little 5 stars if you would. It really helps. It helps keep the momentum going. Shameless plug. Here we are. But thank you to everybody. Be curious, not judgmental, and make it a good one. Thank you all so much.